Well, y'all, you can't preach a sermon series on the Psalms without its most beloved, its most quoted, its most ubiquitous, the 23rd. Y'all know it well, I'm sure, anyone who's grown up in the church, but I would ask you this morning to listen with fresh ears to a new translation from Hebrew scholar Robert Alter. His translation is deeply faithful to the original language, but also to its cadences and sounds. Listen now for the word of the Lord. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In grass meadows he makes me lie down, by quiet waters guides me. My life he brings back, he leads me on pathways of justice for his name's sake. Though I walk in the vale of death's shadow, I fear no harm. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, it is they that console me. You set out a table before me in the face of my foes. You moisten my head with oil, my cup overflows. Let but goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for many long days. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Children's songs have a particular obnoxious way of quickly becoming earworms. Any of y'all who are parents know that. You hear the first 3 bars. Heck, you can just hear one word of it, and it is rattling in your brain for days and days and days. And there is this particular song that we sing here at Westminster that is just that for me, and it's been doing it to me. It's been stuck in my head for weeks now. I just want to be a sheep. That is both, I should note, the title and pretty much all of the words to the song. I just want to be a sheep. Ba, 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 ba. I just want to be a sheep, and then more buying. I had forgotten about that song up until I read this psalm in preparation for this sermon. And then the next day I was watching TV and I was introduced to Ba Rock. Ba Rock is a wool-matted sheep who had been wandering in the Australian wild for years. By the time he was found, he was barely surviving, weighed down by 77 pounds of unsheared wool. So thick that it obscured his vision, so heavy that it affected his ability to walk. I suggest after worship that you look up a picture of Ba Rock. It is harrowing. Ba Rock had been fighting for food and water. He was malnourished under all that wool. His poor health was hidden under his matted layers. He was bulbous and dirty. Frankly, he looks more like a malformed camel than a sheep. He was spotted by a property maintenance man when he just happened to wander in the right place at the right time in from the wild. And from there, he became a sensation. And Ba Rock got me wondering, do I want to be a sheep? Psalm 23 is one of the best known pieces of biblical literature in American culture. Not only among folks like us, folks who go to church week in and week out, folks who are watching church for goodness sake, but in the wider world, in the popular world. Tupac quoted it, and Coolio quoted it, and Kanye quoted it. As the ship sinks in James Cameron's Titanic, the chaplain calls down the comfort of the shepherd. In Clint Eastwood's Pale Rider, a girl quotes the psalm almost in full over her dog's grave, asking after God in a time of deep sadness. President Bush quoted it during the darkest hours of September 11th, 2001. The Grateful Dead riffed on it, and Pink Floyd too. We sing it week after week in hymnody in the church. Shepherd me, O God. You, Lord, are both lamb and shepherd. My shepherd will supply my need. Over and over we appeal to God, our shepherd, but I am still not sure about being a sheep. Don't get me wrong. I am glad to lie down in a grassy meadow. I am glad to lie down just about anywhere, if I'm being honest. And being led alongside a lovely stream, hearing the trickle among the pebbles, that sounds wonderful. The psalm doesn't say anything about a gin and tonic, but I imagine that my shepherd would supply that need too. It sounds blissful, doesn't it? Those first few verses of the psalm and the ones at the end. It sounds rosy and serene. That, I'll take that. I'll be the Lord's sheep if that is our itinerary. But reading this text today, my mind isn't far away from Barak. If I am meant to be a sheep, what does it mean to be shepherded? And where exactly is the great shepherd leading? The psalm sings of green grass and long days dwelling in God's house. And those are the images that linger in our imagination. They're the ones that stay with us. But the shepherd's route to the Lord's house seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? It's threatening, even. Along that road, as you read the psalm, right there sits death. Along our ambling grays, led by the great shepherd, dark shadows stand ready to enfold us. At the table where we are fed, so too sit our enemies, our foes. The Lord is our shepherd, so we, his sheep, will follow. But if God is indeed a good shepherd, why do we so often find ourselves in vales and in valleys? What good shepherd leads us to the edge of our lives? A simple reading of Psalm 23 may approach the shadowed valley as if it is just a hop and a skip and a jump to the grassy meadow. That's how I believe we most often read and approach this text. But life teaches us differently, doesn't it? A faithful reading of the 23rd Psalm considers, dwells even at the vales in its center. It asks us to faithfully follow the shepherd, to trust in God's guiding staff, even as it leads us right up to the valley of the shadow of death. In abstraction, I know such considerations can be a tall task, especially if we find ourselves this morning on the greener side of the grove. What good is dwelling on these shadows, you may think to yourself? We should all keep on the sunny side of life. But then again, closing our eyes to the cries of suffering around us won't protect us for long. And being a sheep means not only being led, but being among our flock, hearing, as it were, their warning cries. A veil stands at the center of Psalm 23. The shepherd has led us there. To counter our instincts to brush it aside, I suggest we turn to another psalm, the psalm just before this one, in order to better enflesh its lament. Listen once more, if you would, to the words of God in the 22nd Psalm. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me? From the words of my groaning, oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. But I am a worm and not human, scorned by others, despised by the people. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one to help. Many bulls encircle me. Strong bulls surround me. They open wide their mouths at me. Like a ravening and roaring lion, I am poured out like water, and my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax melted within my breast. My mouth is dried up. My tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. Friends, this is also the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You lay me in the dust of death. Sit with that contradiction for a moment. The very same psalmist whose poetry soars in praise in 23 accuses God of being far away, of having abandoned post. In the space the psalmist fears God has left, stand now wild animals, mocking neighbors, and an abyss of pain. Still, in the depths of such sorrow, such pain, in the darkest vale approaching death, this psalmist calls on God, demands God. The psalmist's faithfulness is not contingent on many long days of goodness. It is grounded in a trust that the psalmist is led, yoked by rod and by staff, to the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac and Jacob, even when death closes in. It may be an editorial accident, Psalm 23 following the cry of Psalm 22, but I think they stand in unique relationship to one another. One is not complete without the other. Lest we get too rosy in our imagining our relationship with God and picturing it as all streams and meadows, Psalm 22 calls us to give flesh to the vales and valleys at its center. It gives us language to express the fear and longing of our darkest shadows. It provides a model of faithfulness, even in experiences of forsakenness. Where are you, asks the psalmist. More even than why. Where are you? Draw near to me. Where is the cry of the forsaken? It is the cry of Jesus on the cross when he quotes this very text. It is the cry of suffering today, and it links us across time and space and generations to the very heart of God. Does the great shepherd abandon the flock in the depths of the valley? We have to ask ourselves that every now and then, or let it be asked for us. Over 500,000 Americans have been killed by COVID-19. It has now been 52 weeks since we gathered in person without restrictions. We have seen the toll, if we have been paying attention, of shadow and of death. What we thought would be just a short walk through a foreign valley. Do you remember it? 2 weeks, we said. Just 2 weeks has for so many been a prolonged experience of fear and alienation. Why is not the question of this pandemic. Where it has been attempted to be answered, it has fallen to racist tropes, problematic assertions, conspiracy theories, and unhelpful guesswork. The question is not why. What I have heard time and again as a pastor of this congregation is where. Where is God when a beloved family member dies alone? Are they forsaken? Where is God when we are forced to be apart? Where is God when jobs are lost? When families rage against one another in the midst of bitter political opposition? When a black man is killed for going on jogs, for being at the wrong place at the wrong time? Where is God? My God, my God, why have you forsaken me? Sit with it. If you know Psalm 22, you know it on Jesus' lips. After betrayal, trials, and beatings, after the shame of a crown of thorns and the long walk to Golgotha, in the midst of being tortured, Jesus cries out to the Father using the first phrases of Psalm 22. Jesus died faithfully that day, experiencing the Father's far-awayness. Jesus died knowing the veil of death's shadow. In that moment, with that cry, the nearness of the valley, pressing in the space where he once so fully felt the presence of the Father, Jesus takes into the very heart of God the all too common reality of human suffering. It is his fullest identification, I think, with us, that moment on the cross where he absorbs the depth of forsakenness, of grief, of aloneness that all of us have experienced at one time or another. He absorbs that into the heart of God. Where is God in our suffering? It's a reasonable question. Does he abandon post? These Psalms tell us, never. No. When we hear the cry of Jesus on the cross, when we watch that long walk, when we behold his empty tomb, we see the power of the Good Shepherd who lays down his life for his flock, who, yes, leads us through grassy meadows, but who also goes ahead of us, who suffers with us, who knows well the veil of our shadows and leads us through them. It is why Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in prison by the Nazis, wrote that only a suffering God can help. When we hear his cry, we hear the cries of siblings here in Greenville and across the globe who also suffer injustice, who are alienated and mocked and set aside, and whose bodies betray them. When we hear that cry, it is then that we know that God is precisely near us. Christian discipleship, despite what some might say, being a sheep, as it were, is not a means of avoiding difficult paths. It is not unending prosperity or blissful ignorance. It's not greener meadows. It is following Jesus on the way. There will be weddings, we know that, and there will be wine at those weddings, and we should celebrate in those times along that path. But there will be craggy stretches too, suffering, ours and the world's. Psalm 22 teaches us that well, and then Psalm 23 reminds us that even then, especially then, God our shepherd, the Son who experienced death on the cross, the Father who experienced the death of the Son, the Spirit who bound the two in mystical agony, will shepherd us on. God goes ahead. And for those of us on this side of the kingdom, that is good news indeed. In Psalm 22, verses 20 and 21a, the psalmist continues this cry. He goes on and on and on, lamenting that he is not being saved from the mouth of the lion. But then there is this pause right there at the end of the text. Something happens, and in Psalm 21b, all of a sudden we have a change. You have rescued me, cries the psalmist. For he did not despise or abhor the affliction of the afflicted. He did not hide his face from me, but heard when I cried. Jesus died before he could get to that part, and the agony of Friday stretched on, as it does for so many of us. But then came Sunday. There's a pause and a space, and then there is the risen Lord bearing the wounds of the way, shepherding us still to the house of the Lord for many long days. Psalm 22 and 23 are of one piece, a brief of life on this side of resurrection. One is not complete without the other, and they both call us to act more like sheep. Even you, even me, we who pride ourselves on rugged individualism, on wit and wisdom, we who fool ourselves with images of self-made men and absolute freedom, if God is truly our shepherd, then we are truly sheep. And that is a good thing, despite what others may say. We need leading. We need our flock. Otherwise, in vale and valley and in meadow, we are lost. Poor Barak. I wonder what happened to him, how he got there. I wonder if he was spooked by something or if he fled. I wonder if he thought there was some green grass meadow that looked better than wherever he was being led, where the food was more plentiful. One way or another, however it happened, and he was separated. And the weight of his wool and the encroaching darkness around his eyes nearly did him in. If we are going to be sheep, we need shepherding. We can't run to greener meadows or strike out on our own. We stand, as did the psalmist, in the midst of the congregation, bearing the scars of our suffering and proclaiming, despite it all, God's redemptive salvation. Trust God's leading, y'all, and stick together. That's what I think we learn here. Through vales, yes, and also in meadows. Rejoice with one another and bear one another's forsakenness. The table is set for us. The house is full. The flock is returned to its hole. And despite vale and valley, forsakenness and terror, all the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord. And all the families of the nations will worship before him. To him indeed all who sleep in the earth will bow down. Before him shall bow all who go down to dust. And I shall live for him. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord and proclaim his deliverance to a people yet unborn, saying that he has done it. And the Lord will be our shepherd. And thanks be to God, we will be God's sheep. Amen.